A.T. Hagan's We Interrupt This Program, Section 11. A deeper darkness. Anne stepped through and closed the door to Melinda's room as quietly as she could. Her temperature was steadily falling and was now under 100. She shook the thermometer down, rinsed it, and dropped it into its little alcohol-filled holder. Glancing out the kitchen window, she could see her father-in-law working the 2 dog pelts and shook her head. Admittedly, it might well come down to needing to use the things, but the idea of wearing a coat of whatever made out of someone's family pet underwhelmed her. She didn't even want to think how Melinda was going to take it. She had no problem helping her daddy butcher a chicken, and most especially that nasty Aracuna rooster last year. Or not even slaughtering a hog, but wearing dog fur was probably going to be over the top. She wondered what Mike wanted to talk to John about and hoped it wasn't going to be another one of those wild conspiracies he listened to on the shortwave. He and John had really been thick into that junk when they first moved out here, but when credible evidence proved to be lacking for many of the rumors and theories that were flying, then John lost interest, but not the gear and supplies that Mike had convinced them to buy. At least she'd finally gotten John to move all that junk out of the house and into the barn and workshop. She didn't have to clean out there or stumble over it. The power was on again, for now at least, so she poured herself a cold drink and went into the living room with the printouts that Luke had given them. After the impact, she was afraid they'd have to give up refrigeration for the duration with all that it implied for food storage and comfort. Fortunately, Robert pointed out that if they had even intermittent power, they could still keep food cold by using the refrigerator as an old-fashioned icebox. They took everything out of the refrigerator freezer and stuffed it as full as they could with water-filled containers, then turned the refrigerator to its coldest setting. Turned the freezer to its coldest setting. When the power was on, the water froze solid. When the power was off, the ice above kept the food below cool. They did much the same with all of the empty space they had in the chest freezer as well, and they tried not to open either while the power was off to conserve as much cold as possible. They all knew that if the weather stayed continually violent for months, that one day the power would go off and might not come back on. For a long time at least, but while they had it, they were determined to make the most of it. In the living room, she went to the bookshelf where they kept the family medical books. The whole family had somewhat eclectic tastes in reading and experience, so their collection had a rather eccentric feel to it. This time, however, she pulled down some standard references: the Physician's Desk Reference, the Merck Veterinary Manual, Oxford Handbook of Clinical Medicine, Current Medical Diagnosis and Treatment, Medicine for Mountaineering, U.S. Special Forces Medical Handbook, and Where There Is No Doctor. Yeah, everybody should have that one at least in the U.S. Special Forces Medical Handbook. She thought to herself, haha. Anyway, she didn't recognize some of the antibiotics that Luke had put on the list, and she wasn't going to give her daughter anything she hadn't read about first. Most of the books were at least 2 or 3 years old, some even more. Medical books were expensive, even with their educational discount, so they couldn't keep up with the latest and greatest. She reckoned, though, that if they were using them on animals, they probably wouldn't be the latest generation antibiotics, so she ought to be able to find at least a little something on them in one of their books. She pulled the coffee table close, sat on the couch, turned on the reading lamp, and started in. It felt good to be in a book again, and the impacted outside world began to fade away. Outside lightning flashed, and with the following thunderclap, the rain began to pelt down harder. Sitting next to the fireplace, John took another swallow of the awful Canadian whiskey his host preferred, shook his head, and gave a rueful smile. "Okay, Mike," he said disbelievingly. "I can see your point about the president trying to federalize the National Guard. It's been done before when a governor won't play ball, but that's a long way from a coup. I just don't see how they could realistically pull it off. And besides, how can the federal government launch a coup against itself.